We put together a pretty solid list of 10 of the best slasher films ever. So go ahead and jot these movies down as we list them, because if you haven't seen any, you will. Number 10. The Slumber Party Massacre. The Slumber Party Massacre, or The Slumber Party Murders as it's called in the UK, is a slasher flick from 1982, brought to life by Amy Jones, who produced and directed it, with a script by Rita Mae Brown. This movie kicks off the Slumber Party Massacre series and features actors like Michelle Michaels, Robin Stilla, and Michael Valella. The plot centers around a high school senior who invites her friends over for a slumber party, not knowing that a killer armed with a power drill is on the loose nearby. The film, distributed by New World Pictures, had its debut in Los Angeles on September 10, 1982, and later saw a limited release in New York City on November 12th. It made $3.6 million at the box office, with an estimated budget of $220,000. Variety's review was pretty positive, calling the film Slumber Party Massacre an entertaining horror flick, especially noting how female filmmakers put their spin on the classic young women in danger trope. Dave Kerr from the Chicago Reader also liked it, highlighting its smooth pacing and Jones's direction. Leonard Clady from the Los Angeles Times pointed out the film's pacing too, describing it as having a darkly humorous vision and a breathtaking pace. Dale Schenk from The Morning Call referred to it as a rousing thriller that offers plenty of thrilling moments for fans of this kind of chaos. Number 9. Maniac. Maniac is a slasher flick from 1980, directed by William Lustig and penned by C.A. Rosenberg and Joe Spinell. The film features Joe Spinell as Frank Zito, a serial killer of Italian-American descent living in New York City, who goes on a rampage, murdering and scalping young women. Fun fact, Spinell also helped write the script. With a super tight budget, a lot of the scenes in the film were shot in a guerrilla style. Initially labeled as an exploitation flick, Maniac has since built up a cult following, even though it got mixed reviews. In 2012, director Frank Kalfoun and producer Alexandre Aja gave it a fresh take, featuring Elijah Wood in the main role. Even though it wasn't charged with obscenity or officially categorized as a video nasty, Maniac was confiscated by various police departments in Greater Manchester and Lancashire during the video nasty scare, likely due to its infamous reputation abroad. Variety reported that Maniac was set to have a midnight screening at the Cannes Film Festival on May 10, 1980. The movie then made its U.S. debut in New York City on January 30, 1981, and later premiered in Los Angeles on March 6th. It made $4.5 million at the box office, with an estimated budget of $350,000. Tom Becker from DVD Verdict pointed out that the film's effectiveness largely hinges on Joe Spinell's portrayal of Frank, the unkempt guy whose inner darkness takes over. This isn't your typical low-effort horror villain. Spinell crafts a rich character that dives deep beneath the surface. He talks to himself, interacts with mannequins, and even growls like a beast while hunting his victims. Yet he has a certain charm. The dynamic between Spinell and Monroe as a couple has a bit of that Beauty and the Beast vibe, but it feels believable. If Maniac had been a more mainstream flick, Spinell could have been remembered as one of the iconic horror villains. The Hollywood Reporter describes the film as a bit of a gritty classic among genre enthusiasts. Film scholar John Kenneth Muir mentioned that the film oozes sleaze and despair, and he means that in a good way. After watching Maniac, you might feel the need to take a deep breath or even a shower, but you won't feel like you wasted your time on something meaningless. Jim Harper, in his book Legacy of Blood, a comprehensive guide to slasher movies, highlighted Spinell's performance as the film's centerpiece. Number 8. Friday the 13th. Friday the 13th is a slasher flick from 1980, created and directed by Sean S. Cunningham. The script was penned by Victor Miller, and it features a cast that includes Betsy Palmer, Adrienne King, Harry Crosby, Laurie Bartram, Mark Nelson, Janine Taylor, Robbie Morgan, and Kevin Bacon. The story revolves around a bunch of teenage camp counselors who get picked off one by a mysterious killer as they try to revive an old summer camp with a dark history. Friday the 13th hit theaters on May 9th, 1980, all across the US, and eventually made its way to 1,127 screens. It raked in $5.8 million during its opening weekend and wrapped up its domestic run with a total of $39.7 million, which translates to almost 15 million ticket sales. That year, it landed as the 18th highest grossing film, competing with other big horror flicks like The Shining, Dressed to Kill, The Fog, and Prom Night. In total, the film made $59.7 million worldwide. Bill Steele from IFC placed this film as the second best in the series, right after Friday the 13th Part 2, 1981. In a review from 2000, critic Kim Newman gave it 2 out of 5 stars, calling it a lackluster Halloween knockoff, featuring a weak shock factor and a botched finale. As the bodies stack up among this rowdy group of frisky teens, there's a noticeable absence of a truly scary presence. Oddly enough, this film is distinct in the slasher genre because the killer feels almost non-existent. Number 7. Child's Play. Child's Play is a supernatural slasher flick from 1988, directed by Tom Holland. He co-wrote the screenplay with Don Mancini and John LaFia, based on a story by Mancini. The movie features Catherine Hicks and Chris Sarandon, with Brad Dourif voicing the infamous Chucky. The story revolves around a single mom who gifts her son a doll, not realizing it's inhabited by the spirit of a serial killer. MGMUA stirred up some debate by choosing not to drop the film on Halloween, aiming to steer clear of the competition from other horror flicks like Halloween 4, The Return of Michael Myers. Instead, they pushed the release date to align with Veterans Day weekend. On Ebert and Roper, Richard Roper gave the film a thumbs up, calling it gripping and scary, even though he noted a few minor questions were left unanswered. It ended up being United Artists' second highest grossing film of 1988, right after Rain Man. Roger Ebert rated the movie 3 out of 4 stars, describing it as a cheerfully energetic horror film. Corinne James from the New York Times called it a clever, playful thriller, noting that the sharp humor and quick editing keep us on our toes, even if the storyline is a bit predictable. Richard Harrington from The Washington Post mentioned that Holland has a knack for maintaining a good pace without hurrying things along. However, he pointed out that Child's Play takes a dark turn towards the end. It feels like a repeat of nearly every horror flick from the past decade, and it also features some pretty intense scenes involving a 6-year-old that can be quite unsettling. Number 6. The Burning. The Burning is a slasher flick from 1981, directed by Tony Malum and featuring actors like Brian Matthews, Leah Ayres, Brian Backer, Larry Joshua, and Lou David. The story revolves around a summer camp caretaker who gets severely burned due to a prank that goes awry, and years later, he comes back for revenge at a nearby camp. This film also marks the first appearances of Jason Alexander, Fisher Stevens, and Holly Hunter. The movie premiered on May 8, 1981, in Florida across 110 screens, with a wider release starting on May 22nd. Variety reported that it had a strong showing in Buffalo, where it was filmed, raking in $33,000 from 3 theaters and 2 drive-ins. However, the excitement quickly faded, leading to a drop of over 50% in box office earnings the next week. Janet Maslin from the New York Times mentioned that The Burning strays a bit from typical genre cliches while still keeping the violence and sadism that are essential to schlock horror. Meanwhile, the Time Out Film Guide pointed out that while the suspense is handled well, being too familiar with this type of film can lead to a lack of appreciation. Kim Newman from Empire magazine criticized it for being a clear copy of Friday the 13th, although he did give a nod to Tom Savini's impressive special effects. AllMovie noted that with its slow pacing and intense gore, The Burning hits the creepiness factor, but it might be viewed more favorably if it hadn't been overshadowed by the wave of similar films that followed its release. Number 5. The Texas Chainsaw Massacre. The Texas Chainsaw Massacre is a 1974 indie horror flick that was produced, co-composed, and directed by Tobe Hooper, who teamed up with Kim Henkel to write the script. It features actors like Marilyn Burns, Paul A. Partain, Edwin Neal, Jim Sedow, and Gunnar Hansen. The story revolves around a group of friends who end up in a terrifying situation with a family of cannibals while heading to an old homestead. The Texas Chainsaw Massacre made its debut in Austin, Texas, on October 1st, 1974, nearly a year after filming wrapped up. It was shown across the U.S. as a Saturday afternoon matinee, and its misleading promotion as a true story really helped pull in a wide audience. For 8 years, starting in 1976, it was brought back to first-run theaters every year, backed by big full-page ads. In the end, the film raked in over $30 million in the US and Canada, with $14.4 million from rentals, making it the 12th highest-grossing film released in 1974, all on a shoestring budget. It held the title among indie films until 1978, when John Carpenter's Halloween came along and made $47 million. After its first run in the UK, which included a year-long stint in London theaters, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre faced a ban based on advice from Stephen Murphy, the secretary of the British Board of Film Censors, BBFC, and later from his successor, James Furman. During the ban, the term chainsaw was even prohibited in movie titles, leading to some filmmakers having to change their titles. In 1998, Camden London Borough Council surprisingly issued a license for the film, despite the ongoing BBFC ban. The next year, the BBFC finally approved the Texas Chainsaw Massacre for release without cuts, giving it an 18 certificate, and it aired on Channel 4 a year later. When the 83-minute version was sent to the Australian Classification Board by distributor 7 Keys in June 1975, it was denied a classification. A shorter 77-minute version also faced the same fate in December of that year. In 1981, Greater Union Film Distributors tried again with the 83-minute version, but was met with another refusal. It wasn't until 1984, when Filmway's Australasian distributors submitted it, that it finally received an R rating. The film faced bans in several other countries too, including Brazil, Chile, Finland, France, Iceland, Ireland, Norway, Singapore, Sweden, and West Germany. In Sweden, it became a symbol of the video nasty debate that was happening at the time. The film made its way back to Australia in 2021 and is set to release in Russia in 2024, raking in $36,879 at the international box office. Donald B. Berrigan from the Cincinnati Enquirer gave a big shout-out to Burns' performance, saying, "Marilyn Burns as Sally should totally get a Special Academy Award for delivering one of the most convincing and impressive acting jobs in film history." Meanwhile, Patrick Taggart of the Austin American-Statesman called it the most significant horror flick since George A. Romero's Night of the Living Dead, 1968. Variety noted that the film was well-crafted, even with what they described as heavy doses of gore. John McCarty from Cinefantastique mentioned that the house in the movie made the Bates Motel seem almost cozy in comparison. When Stephen Koch revisited the film in his 1976 piece Fashions in Pornography for Harper's Magazine, he found the sadistic violence to be pretty extreme and lacking in creativity. Roger Ebert said, "Horror and exploitation films almost always turn a profit if they're brought in at the right price. So they provide a good starting place for ambitious would-be filmmakers who can't get more conventional projects off the ground." The Texas Chainsaw Massacre belongs in a select company, with Night of the Living Dead and Last House on the left, of films that are really a lot better than the genre requires. Not, however, that you'd necessarily enjoy seeing it. The Texas Chainsaw Massacre is often hailed as one of the best and most debated horror flicks ever made, leaving a huge mark on the genre. Back in 1999, Richard Zoglin from Time noted that it set a new standard for slasher films. The Times even named it one of the 50 most controversial movies in history. Tony Magistrale argues that this film opened the door for horror to tackle social issues. Mark Olson from the Los Angeles Times described it as cheap, grubby, and out of control, stating that it both defines and completely surpasses the idea of an exploitation film. Number 4. Black Christmas. Black Christmas, which was originally called Silent Night, Evil Night in the US, and later renamed Stranger in the House for TV, is a Canadian slasher flick from 1974. Bob Clark produced and directed it, with a script by Roy Moore. The film features Olivia Hussey, Keir Dullea, Margot Kidder, and John Saxon. It revolves around a bunch of sorority sisters who start getting creepy phone calls and end up being hunted down and killed by a mysterious killer during the holiday season. Drawing from the urban legend, The Babysitter and the Man Upstairs, and a string of murders in the Westmount area of Montreal, Quebec, Moore crafted the screenplay titled Stop Me. The filmmakers tweaked the script quite a bit, mainly moving the story to a university vibe with younger characters. Filming took place in Toronto in 1974, with a budget around $686,000, and Warner Brothers handled the distribution in North America, leading to a worldwide gross of $4 million. Heidi Martinuzzi from Film Threat described the movie as innovative and gave a shout-out to the lead actresses, Olivia Hussey and Margot Kidder. TV Guide rated it 3 out of 4 stars, mentioning that while it follows a typical formula, Clark's clever use of plot elements like creepy phone calls from the killer and a surprising twist ending adds some flair. Film critic Leonard Maltin gave it 2.5 stars, calling it bizarre, but highlighted Kidder's performance as a highlight. The Time Out Film Guide pointed out that the film delivers a solid dose of classic suspense. Number 3. Scream. Scream is a slasher flick from 1996, directed by Wes Craven and penned by Kevin Williamson. It features a cast including David Arquette, Neve Campbell, Courtney Cox, Matthew Lillard, Rose McGowan, Skeet Ulrich, and Drew Barrymore. The story takes place in the made-up town of Woodsboro, California, and revolves around high schooler Sydney Prescott, played by Campbell, and her pals, who find themselves in the crosshairs of a masked killer called Ghostface, just as the anniversary of her mom's murder rolls around. Williamson was having a tough time getting his projects rolling when he stumbled upon news about a string of murders by the Gainesville Ripper. This sparked his creativity as he crafted a screenplay that poked fun at the typical slasher tropes seen in classics like Halloween, 1978, Friday the 13th, 1980, and A Nightmare on Elm Street, 1984. Titled Scary Movie, his script caught the attention of several studios, leading to a fierce bidding war before Miramax Films snagged the rights. Even though Craven had turned down the chance to direct several times, he changed his mind after reading the script, eager to bounce back from some career lows. The addition of Barrymore and Cox brought even more backing from the studio. Filming took place in California from April to June 1996, with a budget of $15 million. Craven had to tone down the film's violence after a heated clash with the Motion Picture Association of America, MPAA, regarding the R rating. When Scream hit theaters on December 20th, 1996, it wasn't expected to do well, especially since slasher films weren't usually released during the holiday season. Over its opening weekend, the film pulled in $6.4 million from 1,413 theaters, averaging about $4,497 per theater. Madalena shared that she and Craven watched a lively crowd for Beavis and Butthead Do America, while Scream had maybe 7 people in there. No one was laughing or screaming. We left feeling really down. Despite this, Scream gained positive buzz from audiences and exit polls, prompting the studio to boost its marketing and distribution budget. This helped Scream's performance pick up in the following weeks. Although it dropped to 5th place in its second weekend, it still managed to earn $9.1 million and then climbed to 3rd place in its 3rd weekend with $10 million. Scream stayed in the top 10 highest-grossing films for 9 weeks, turning into an unexpected hit and raking in a total of $103 million. This made it the 13th highest-grossing film of 1996 and the top slasher film of its time until Halloween 2018. It was also Miramax's second film to hit the $100 million mark in the US and Canada, following Pulp Fiction, 1994. Scream got mostly good reviews from critics. People like Roger Ebert, James Berardinelli, and Owen Gleiberman highlighted the film's clever take on classic horror movies and its self-aware humor. Janet Maslin pointed out that while Scream brought fresh ideas to the genre, it quickly ran out of steam. John Hartle echoed this, suggesting that the film was so busy referencing others that it struggled to tell a clear story. Number 2, A Nightmare on Elm Street. A Nightmare on Elm Street is a classic slasher flick from 1984, crafted by Wes Craven and produced by Robert Shaye. This film kicks off the A Nightmare on Elm Street series and features a cast that includes Heather Langenkamp, John Saxon, Roni Blackley, and Robert Englund as the infamous Freddy Krueger, along with Johnny Depp making his first appearance on the big screen. The story revolves around a group of teens who find themselves in the crosshairs of Krueger, a vengeful spirit of a child murderer who takes his revenge on their parents by invading their dreams and killing them. This was one of the early films made by New Line Cinema, which at the time was mainly focused on distributing movies. This helped the company grow into a successful mini-major film studio, earning it the nickname, The House That Freddy Built. The movie is known for continuing a lot of the themes seen in low-budget horror flicks from the 70s and 80s, especially those that started with John Carpenter's 1978 classic Halloween. It features that classic morality tale where sexually active teens end up meeting their doom, which is how the term slasher film came about. A Nightmare on Elm Street hit theaters in the US on November 9, 1984, with a limited release in 165 cinemas. It made a solid $1,271,000 in its opening weekend, marking it as a quick commercial hit. By the end of its run, the film raked in a total of $25.5 million in the US and Canada, and it pulled in around $57 million globally. Paul Attanasio from The Washington Post gave a thumbs up to the film, saying that, for a low-budget flick, Nightmare on Elm Street is impressively polished. The script is sharp and clever, and the cinematography by Jacques Haitkin is both clear and expressive. He pointed out that the genre has its limits, but Craven handles it well. A Nightmare on Elm Street sits nicely between an exploitation movie and classic surrealism. He also mentioned Freddy Krueger, calling him the most terrifying character in the genre since The Shape first appeared in Halloween. Variety chimed in, describing the film as a highly creative horror movie, praising the special effects, but noting that it doesn't quite wrap up its themes in a satisfying way by the end. The movie boasts a 95% approval rating from 60 reviews on Rotten Tomatoes, averaging 7.8 out of 10. The consensus on the site highlights that Wes Craven's clever concept, paired with the terrifying look of Freddy Krueger, continues to haunt viewers even now. Number 1. Halloween. Halloween, also known as John Carpenter's Halloween, is a slasher film from 1978 that was both directed and scored by John Carpenter, who teamed up with producer Deborah Hill to co-write the script. The movie features Donald Pleasance, Jamie Lee Curtis in her first film role, P.J. Soles, and Nancy Loomis. Taking place mainly in the made-up town of Haddonfield, Illinois, the story revolves around Michael Myers, a mental patient who was locked away for killing his teenage sister on Halloween night when he was a kid. After 15 years, he breaks out and heads back to Haddonfield, where he starts stalking babysitter Laurie Strode and her friends, all while his psychiatrist, Dr. Samuel Loomis, is hot on his trail. Halloween hit the big screen on October 24, 1978, at the AMC Empire Theater in downtown Kansas City, Missouri. Aquarius Releasing took care of getting it out to the Philadelphia and New York City areas. In its first week, it raked in $1,270,000 from 198 theaters across the U.S., with 72 in New York City and 98 in Southern California. Overall, The film made $47 million in the US and another $23 million internationally, totaling $70 million. This made it one of the most successful indie films ever, selling around 20.1 million tickets during its original run. It still holds the record for the highest-grossing Halloween film and ranks third in the slasher genre, just behind Scream, 1996, and Scream 2, 1997. Pauline Kael delivered a harsh critique in The New Yorker, implying that Carpenter appears to lack a life beyond filmmaking. She pointed out that you can see influences from directors like Hitchcock and Brian De Palma, as well as Val Lewton's work, in almost every idea he presents. She also pondered that when a horror film focuses solely on cheap thrills, like the overused trope of the escaped lunatic, it might actually connect with audiences on a more primal, childlike level compared to more refined horror films. The Los Angeles Times called the movie a well-crafted yet hollow and grim thriller, while Bill Von Maurer from the Miami Times thought it was unexpectedly impressive, pointing out that if you're in the right age group and mindset, Halloween is genuinely scary. Susan Stark from the Detroit Free Press labeled Halloween as a rising cult classic when it first came out, describing it as extremely atmospheric and complimenting its direction and soundtrack. Gene Siskel from the Chicago Tribune rated the film 3.5 stars out of 4, describing it as a beautifully made thriller. He praised director Carpenter for his ability to create shocks while keeping the audience entertained, noting how he builds up suspense and then holds off on delivering the scare for different lengths of time. Siskel felt the tension was significant, admitting that he found himself glancing around to ensure no strange characters were lurking behind him. On the flip side, Gary Arnold from the Washington Post wasn't impressed, stating that with so little character or plot development between the suspenseful moments, he often wished the killer would just get on with it. He suggested that Carpenter's attempts to create spine-tingling anticipation felt more tedious than thrilling.